right. Hey, this is Ron Collins, the general manager of the Yellow Springs Nine, back for part two of what I'll call the Insanity Continues. Posted the walkthrough of the financial spreadsheet, planning spreadsheet that I used yesterday, and actually had a couple of different GMs reach out to me about all the rest of it. And as you saw on the public forum, I thought, well, since I've got a couple of people asking, I'll go ahead and walk through most of the rest of what I do. I've reconfigured this a little bit to get rid of all of the stuff I use to track things for the league, right? For my role in the league, and instead have focused more on the idea of um, what would it take to just kind of run the team and have some fun. Of course, the first thing that I need to put forward here is that I've done this great little cover sheet, and in my own inimitable typo man superhero style, I have a typo in my cover. So first thing I'll do here is fix this before I send it off to everyone else. When I am done with, I'll just kind of walk through everything that I do to run my team. It's not saying that you should do it. It's not saying that it even makes any sense. It's just how my brain works and how I like to look at my team. And perhaps you can see a little bit of why, what goes into my thought pattern around saying that I struggle very much to ever have more than one team in a league because I manage an organization. I manage a group of teams. So effectively, I'm managing, what, 6 teams plus IC plus um, the FPL. So it's a bunch of teams to manage, and I just enjoy the heck out of it. I enjoy working all the way down into the minors when I'm on my game, which is not all the time. I'm really focused on the whole 250 or so fake players that we've got. So anyway, all of that being said, I'm going to jump right in and start talking about things. I have restructured this thing a little bit and struck out all and focused again only on all the things that I think you would actually care about if you were as weird as I was. So let me start, actually, rather than going, you can see I've got a series of tabs along the bottom, which is what created the collection of questions that I got. I think what I will do, I have ordered them in the way that I think about things. I think I will actually start with the salary worksheet because I think that is what most people will actually care about and be able to walk away and use right away if you so care, right? So here's my salary worksheet. It is actually the core of my 7-year plan that I talk about. I do literally plan out where I think my holes are going to be through 5, 6, 7 years, right? And you can see here I've moved I've moved this over to 2044. Every year that I run this, I delete the year prior. So when 2044 finishes, this columns B and C, I will delete and I'll add columns over on the right for 2051. The layout is pretty self-explanatory. I like to do this so that I know what my real salaries are going to be over time. The layout is a couple of players in each position who I think are going to be the mainstays in those roles. So in my catcher role, I've got Jesus Rodriguez, J2, and Bruce McKinley. They are quite young. You can see that they fill slots out into 2047 and 2048. Then on the bottom of each one of the positions, I have my prospect list. And you can see I've gone so far as to kind of bold the prospects I think are more real. So in this case, for catchers, Alistair Hall was my last year #1 pick. Currently sitting down in, I think, AA, although maybe I think he's in the FPL right now. Looks like he should be ready in the 2046 range. But then I've got some other guys that I could throw in if I absolutely need to, right? So that's kind of fundamentally how to read that. Each player you can see has a salary assigned to it in these smaller columns. And if you go down um, into the bottom, I also have a line called 40 man. If you look at the equation on this one, this is actually a calculated field. I have 13 possible players at $500,000 apiece times 16% of their salary. That's because the 40-man roster is 27 active minus 13, so 13 possible players I can have there. So I'm reserving essentially, what is that, $1.08 million to pay for my 40-man roster out of my salary cap. That's one thing that I wish that there's a constant series of questions on the board. Which salary is your salary in for the salary cap, and this calculates that at least within the realm of my tracking, right? So I know that right now, my 2044 salary cap expense, if I add all these up, is $107 million and $107,083,000, right? Couple other important things for my sake. I'm a color coder. It makes it really easy for me to see some things jumping out. The yellows are all players who are on their $500,000 seasons, and in fact, I should color code a couple others. Usually, I make sure I color code the very last one. So, for example, J2 Jesus Rodriguez is in his last Mensal year. The light red coded are players in their arbitration years. And so I will update those often by going into Out of the Park and listing, what Out of the Park says is their projected numbers. If I think that they're completely way wrong, sometimes I will manually override some of those, but that's just, you do you do you, I do me. The other couple of colors on here are the blue colors are players who I believe are prospects and are not actually on the major league or 40-man roster necessarily, but that is when I expect that they will be ready and will be plugged in. So my IFA that I bought last January, Burham Tahir, knock on wood, crossed fingers, he's looking like he's survived his first year in professional baseball, and so he is still locked in the plan here, right? The blueprint, the big wheel in the sky, the blustering wind, whatever whatever we want to call this. This is the Yellow Springs 9 version of that. Sorry, I had to pause for a sip of coffee to keep my brain going here this morning. So anyway, you can kind of at a glance then see what positions we have players kind of ready to play. And I admit I'm a little bit stingy with putting prospects in place, but you can see I've got a shortstop in the IC. Looks like I'm hoping that I can have him ready in 2047, which would be a pretty decent time. I've got a hole here. Looks like in my shortstop realm, if I don't have a reasonable player to plug in there in 2046, I may have to go to the free agent market and so forth. Okay. I don't have a second real center fielder. I've got a couple of guys that I could throw in. I should probably put another. Alfredo Ruiz is a super defender who I'll go and plug him in there. Who could step in and provide some kind of value. He won't hit anything, but he'll provide some value. You can also see that here in my right field slot, I have a question around Ricardo Mendoza. So I know I have an uncertainty here. He may opt out and end up spending more money than I want on 2045, and I may extend him. The other point here is these greens. This is just me saying I think that I will likely extend this player, and just throwing in some fake numbers. So right? I would if I could sign Dong Po Thumb at 15, 18, 18, 18, 18, 18, whatever, I would, number one, probably do that. But if I do that, then I can come down here and see the root problem of my existence right now is that 2045 becomes a really critical year. You can see if I'm going to keep all of my players at the rates that they are at, I have a problem with the league front office in that my salary projection is $118 million, and by definition, that means that I'm $8 million in trouble. So I'm going to have to make some moves some way to make that up. Okay, other things that I can see looking at this is, on the page, on the screen that I'm at with pictures, you can see I'm actually in pretty good shape, I think, from a starting pitching standpoint, as long as I don't have any injuries, which means that I'm not in very good shape at all. I have 5 starters. I think they are starters that most every team, a majority of teams in the league would love to have on their roster, and I definitely love to have them. What I don't have is a whole lot of stuff coming along in the pipeline in the starting pitching world, so it's a big hole in my psyche there. Relief pitchers, I have the kind of the opposite situation. I actually have several really nice relief pitchers coming into the realm, which is part of my strategy. I decided 5 years ago or so that I was going to really focus on bullpen and bullpen arms and find ways to use them. So this sheet tells me, if I'm thinking about it enough, that I need to be prepared um, prepared to deal with at least the 1 to 2 starting pitching injuries that I expect that I'll get, which means that most likely, last year I had Al Colbert start several games. I had Turner O'Macken start a couple. I had Josh Henson start 15 or so. And Jose Sanchez started a collection. So I don't know what I'll end up doing, but this spreadsheet basically says, where are the holes in the organization over the next 7 years? And in this case, it's really more accurate to 4 or 5 years. You can start to see in 2049 and 2050, I have not really gone through and identified um, enough of where the plan really is. So really, I've got about a 4.5 year plan right now, and it starts to degrade in years 6 and 7. Okay. So this is probably the most important sheet for most people. If you don't do something like this, and you wanted to do something that it was like what I did, this would be probably the thing that I would recommend the most, because it's the most useful, functioning tool. Some other things that I do, I'll get into my pitchers and hitters next. This is where I may be maybe more insane than the usual insanity. I go through and I collect all the data for all the ratings data for all of my players, essentially every sim. If I miss a sim, I have to go back and update and things like that. So I use Stats Plus Development Report after every sim. And so, basically the layout of these hitters and pitchers spreadsheets are, I'll call it, what I like to see. If I were OTP's developers, this is how I would lay out the organization. When I was back in the old Fable, I gave a spreadsheet of this like this to, I used to do this way back then, and I gave that to Cuervo, who we should definitely have in the league. If we could possibly get Cuervo in the league, he would be a massive advantage. But he went through and actually coded this on our website, and so you could get this information in real time without having to manually update it, which is admittedly a pain in the butt. But you can see here, looking at my pitchers list, maybe I'll probably just look at one set, because I do the same thing for pitchers and hitters, and you can play with it all you want. A couple of things. Obviously, I've got it broke into major league level, double A or triple A level, double A level. I can scroll down and you can see essentially every pitcher in my organization by organizational level. I then note that in one of the columns so that I can do some sorting. At least that was the intention. The fact of the matter is I very rarely do any actual sorting on this particular column, but it was a good idea while it lasted. I also have this column D, which is essentially my own personal prospect ranking. When kids are below 24, 25 years old, I label them with numbers so that I can spot them quickly. It's kind of like my version of overall ratings, only I don't care about a lot of the details, right? In my mind, Angel Hernandez and Ternan O'Macken and Al Colbert, Sergio Perez, Roberto Ramirez, all of those were fives. I considered them to be impact players, right? Carlos Pineda was a five, an impact player. Thomas Ramirez is a four, solid player, going to definitely use a lot of them. David Lee, who I got from Charlotte and everyone claims is a super duper ace. I don't actually think he's a super duper ace. I just think he's a good solid pitcher. So I label him a four. Josh Henshin should probably be a four when it comes up down to it. In fact, as I've moved him to a reliever, maybe I'll swap him. It doesn't really matter, right? It's only for me, so that I can keep my eyes out on him and kind of move him up and down the list. This Dean Stranahan, I've wrote some TNs on and so forth. He's been actually bumping up, and he just bumped yesterday. I think yesterday, last him to a 10 on stuff. So, sometimes the baseball gods give it, and so that's nice. These overall ratings, I go back. They're out of date. I don't update those every time because I honestly don't really care about overall ratings. Let's see. This is a activity column, so you can note lots of different things on here. I note whether they're on the disabled list, 60-day disabled list. Armando Duarte is on the 60-day disabled list. If I've assigned a player to FPL, so I pull them out. If they're on the 40-man roster, an X is the 40-man roster, a hashtag is the non-40-man roster. How many options they've used, that's actually out of date. I need to update them. Date of birth, which becomes important because I have this hash mark hashtag thing is there because the column is too small. I put in the last date that I updated, so 12/1/2043, which is the latest sim. I have updated all of the actual rating information from then. And then the spreadsheet uses the player's birth date and that 2143 or 12/1/43 to calculate his age. So that's this trunk $K $1 formula in here. So it just automatically calculates how old the player is. Heights and weights probably update once a year, once a season. Don't really care that much about them. They're just interesting and fun. The throws right and left, you'll see on the hitter sheet, right? I've got bats and throws. Source, I keep track of where I got the player from. So Carlos Valle was a draft pick in 2031, fourth round draft pick. So DR 31.4, sometimes you'll see a slash. It's the same thing down here. Lester Arundel was a 2042 draft pick in the ninth round. I'm just not consistent on that. I should probably just fix it just for the anal retentive side of me. Then notes, here are my plan. You can see actually last night I went through and I went down the entire organization and listed what I think should happen for each of these players, right? Jose Sanchez, Kattenberg, and Fernandez are all injury replacement kind of guys, or I would trade them. Dean Stranahan is now ready. You can see Gomez, Mendez, and Andres, I think, are all essentially ready to pitch, although Andres is still questionable. You get the idea. Then I have stuff potential. So each of the gray bars are potentials. Stamina, ground ball, fly ball, the hold rating. This is an interesting collection, right? Because I keep the different pitches in same deal, actual versus potential. And then these purple columns go calculate things, right? This light purple calculates just raw how many pitches does a guy have. And then the next two calculates how many are 6+ in development and how many are 6+ in potential, right? So Carlos Valle has 5 pitches. All 5 of them are over 6, and all 5 of them are developed more than 6. Whereas if I look at, where's one that's different here, right? Thomas Ramirez has 4 total pitches. 3 of them are over 6, and 3 of them are developed at over 6. The only one that is not is his changeup, which is a 2-4. This is a valuable column when I start looking for things like relief to starter conversions and starter to relief conversions and things like that. Okay, so that's a bit of a crash course on what I do. One of the values of this sheet is not just that there is a value in keeping the data up because I actually see things that change on a very routine basis, right? But beyond that, I can do all sorts of things here, right? If people are constantly complaining, they want to see who's eligible for Rule 5, right? So I can go here and do a sort or do a filter, right? These cancel. These 1, 2, 3. What is it? 5, 7, 8, 9. Yeah, 9 items I've got as listed as being filterable, right? So that means I can do a drop down, and I don't know if this shows up on the video or not, but when I do a drop down on the 40-man, right, it gives me a list of things that I can select: 0, the hashtag, £, the little X or blanks, right? I always take the 0 because I have I'll show that in a second. I've hard coded a 0 in so that it keeps my levels, level bars there. And then the hashtag for if they're eligible for the 40 or for the Rule 5 draft. Okay. So when I do that, what I find is here are the pitchers that are eligible for the Rule 5 draft. And then I can go through and say, are any of these guys I want to protect? So do I need to move them onto the 40-man roster? So that's one way that I use that filtering thing. Another way that I use this is often by position. If I'm looking for trying to manage my minors, I'm constantly trying to make sure that I can see, are people in the right levels, right? And in fact, I'll go to the hitters for this because it's a little bit more indicative, right? I can look at, are all my hitters in the right levels? Let me look at catchers, right? So I select 0 so that I have the right levels collected, and you'll see one of the reasons I collect 0 is over here, like line 2, major league level. I've coded this with a 0 specifically so that I can select it to keep it, right? But anyway, here's how I can look at my catchers across all of the levels and ask myself, are these in the right places? And mostly I look at ages to begin with. And so you can see, yes, throughout my entire organization, if I just kind of scan my ages up, I see things are in pretty good shape, with the exception I'd like to see 21-year-old Jorge Leon and Javier Gallegos. At 21 years old, they really should be at A level. So they're probably actually getting close to getting the notorious release tag on. The release tag for me, they're just notes. They say I could release this guy if I want to, right? If I need to. Otherwise, he's just an organization guy that moves around. But you can see I've got my 22 and 23-year-old guy at the AA level. Those players are probably at about the right level. Would like Alistair Hall to move up into AAA here pretty soon, and in reality, that's really what I should probably jot is 2044. We will hope he goes to AAA. That would be his proper development cycle. Now, that having been said, let me go back to the worksheet, right? Because I just said Alistair to the salary worksheet. I just said that Alistair Hall I've got here looking like a 2046 player. If he makes it to AAA next year, 2044, then really he's probably a 2045 player, which means given that I don't have a slot, I will either need to remove Jesus Rodriguez or Bruce McKinley. My guess is I would not want to do either one of those two. So I would probably trade Alistair Hall if we get a little bit further along in the year, and if somebody will give me something of some value that I can plug into my plan. I don't really care if I get equal value to Alistair Hall or more. I mean, obviously, it'd be great if I get more value. What I really look at when I would be trading Alistair Hall is, does it fill one of the slots I've got? Right? Does it fix my shortstop problem? Does it fix my center field issue? Can I find a starting pitcher that I can throw into the prospect list and hope that he pans out? Whatever works, right? So anyway, so you get the idea. There's the value of being able to sort on position. Those are the two things that I do the most: is sort on Rule 5 and sort on position. But that's why I designed the spreadsheet to do those kinds of things, design these little filters and things like that. Okay. What's next? We are in the middle of free agent season. You'll note this is my free agent offer spreadsheet. It's just a hacked up, essentially notepad. It doesn't have any grand complex design to it. All I really do is, and actually I suppose I should fix these. All I'm really doing here is keeping track of what's already in the game, and the game keeps track of it for you. But I will often, I was not very active last year in free agency. I'm not going to be very active this year. What I will often do is put in, a set of offers and dollars and years and opt-outs and bonus, right? And what date I offered it, and wants more money, because most of them say they want more money, right? And so I'll keep that, because then I'll know what I offered him before, and then I will, for 12/16, oops, let's say that I offer him 200, right? And $1 million. Then I know, I've got a record of all the different things. I do the same thing with my draft signings. This is last year's, right? All of my draft picks, what they demanded, whether they thought they were easy, hard, blah blah blah, what the slot was, what I offered, and whether the players end up accepting them or not. And then here are my IFAs, where I'm calculating. Pretty straightforward, simple. Here's a list of IFAs that we had last year. I looked for them and I said, what are the players that I'm going to actually make bids on? I made bids on Modiwala and Tahir, which then adds up to 24K. Taxes were that minus 5 million. So all total, I was spending $43 million in IFAs. And you get the idea. It's just a kind of little scratch sheet. Already been through the salary worksheet. Bonuses I showed in the financial sim. Just put a list of all the players who might get bonuses, and then I've got this little calculated field for, possible is just all of them. It's possible that every one of these could have been collected, right? Um, this is the same thing here, but it's actually not true because really only one of these two could possibly make it, right? Vallier and Ramos cannot both win the Nebula, and Thumb and Mendoza cannot both win uh, the Sawyer Silk. But I just do that, and then most likely every time I put an X in a box, as you'll see, right, that it changes. If if I say Vallier is most likely not going to make the Nebula, Nebraska. You can tell I'm a science fiction writer. The Nebraska, um, then that will calculate out. So it just gives me the idea of what I'm going to spend. Um, here's my participation point usage. You can scroll up. I will post this when you see it. You can scroll all the way up. I started back in 2031 when I had 657 total points. This is how this works, right? I went through and I listed all the things that I actually spent points on, right, and what happened, right? I spent 50 points reducing Crash Flew Loose's greed for all the good that it did me. So there's 50 points, and it subtracted off from the balance to make 640 points left. Aaron Stone spent 50 points on his work ethic, and you can see that it left me with 590 points all the way down to the end of the year, where I did Mamsilo Juretic, and that left me with 300 work ethic, and that left me with 350 points that I had not spent. The 2032 deposit comes in at 385 total points, so that makes me balance out at 735. You get the idea. The stuff on the right-hand side of that sheet are just basically hard-coded in what the rules of PPT are and what I can use points for, which is helpful. Don't have to actually click through on the website to find them all. The other thing that's advantageous here is that when you can see when I have actually spent points, I keep track of what the numbers were. So Thomas Chavez, way back when, work ethic went from 102 to 122, so that by the time I come to next year, I know kind of where players will drift. I mean, Thomas Chavez will not be a 122 work ethic by the time I get around to next year, but I'll know what kind of ballpark they should be in. Pardon me. The other thing I do when you come down to the very bottom, you'll see where I'm at here with the 2043 deposit and what I've done on the forum already so far. I also keep little jot notes of things that I would like to do, right? So if I have infinite points, I'll do various different things. That's a little out of date right now. Not a big deal. Finance Sim, we went through that in the other video. Here's my historical depth chart. This is just for me fun, right? I keep track. I have been keeping track for some time now since I took over the team in 2025 was my first full year. Technically, I took over in the last 3 games of 2024. I have a listing now of players who effectively played the majority of games in each of these roles, so I can kind of look at generations, right? I think it's fun to look at my shortstops, for example, with Tino Aguilera. I can remember a fun little TN that I wrote about re-signing him. Pedro Hernandez came in for 1 year. He was way out of place. Should have been a third baseman. But you can see he actually was as he shifted over in the third baseline with Luke Jordan and Pedro Hernandez essentially playing a right-handed platoon, which was kind of odd since Luke had reverse splits. Juan Aravello came in. He was a great story for a couple of years. Jumped straight out of Double-A from nowhere. Then the Angel Costello years came in, where Costello and McQuaid played, and then Miguel Padilla. We had the 4 years of Splatter Dong Po Thum came in for 1 year at shortstop and then moved to third base throughout his next 3 years, and then of course moved to second base. So he's got a fun little career path there. You get the idea. I mean, I just find this fun so that I can remember. My intention was at one point to write a fairly long TN or feature on kind of infields and outfields and whatnot. I also keep track of all the trades that I've made, so I can tell you all the way back to the beginning. My very first trade was with Loserville, where I traded a closer prior to his arbitration years for essentially a nobody, Doug Good, who didn't really do anything. So there we go. I needed a semi-decent shortstop also, so I traded a couple of semi-prospects for a old Edward Allen, who I believe is now actually the manager of the Las Vegas Hustlers, or a coach there. I can't remember which one. I have to look him up. Manager records. These are, I went back in time throughout all of my Yellow Springs history, so I can now tell you for all of our Yellow Springs managers since 1995 what their win-loss records are, both regular season and oh god, something's sticking in my throat here. In the postseason. I'm not sure why we keep track of the postseason records, to be honest with you, because nobody really cares about October baseball. But you can see both Bill Inkster and Sam Brewington both have winning records in the postseason, despite some of the other problems you might have heard about. Also, from a GM standpoint, I went through and I tracked all the GMs, thanks to the unified history there that Stephen keeps up. That's really helpful to me there. Okay. I have my doctor. I went ahead and left some of this information in here. Julio Carmona is my doctor and where he sits on the overall scale. All these other doctors were guys that I was looking at when I was searching, right, when I was looking to sign a doctor. So I signed a young doctor and I spent some points to try to make sure that his numbers moved up. So over the 10 years or 8 years, however long he's been our team doctor, he started with some things that were out here in the greats and goods, or greats and excellences, and I've moved them up as we got further along. So he's a pretty good doctor. And in fact, this last year he bumped one or two of these, which is kind of fun to think about. Farm depth charts. This is just a thing that I keep. You can see they're out of date by a year. I've had a tough year between all the COVID stuff and my parents and so forth. And I'm a little out of date, but I kept these because I used them as the templates for those. Every year or so, I will go through and put out a depth study of my minor league system. And so I just copy these and paste them over in another thing, shuffle them around, and then I can cut and paste them into those table makers. And that's kind of fun. Ballparks. This is helpful to me. Kind of stands on its own. I keep a list of all the different ballparks. I get out of date with my name, so I'm not sure I've got all the right names in here. And I've actually been here and needs to be modified. The main point is I try to keep track of these actual numbers, which then I can translate down into down here in lines 35 to 40. I track them down into the divisions and leagues, so you can get a kind of flavor for who the most offensive divisions and leagues are. And then I was on the same kind of page as Alan Earlers was back in the day when we went to this full division format without intra-league. That then became you then became able to calculate cleanly the number of games played in each one of the different parks. And so I've done this. This right-hand side is actually a operational in-game process or in-season process, to where a player in Chicago, for example, plays in this really dump of a park, Black Sox Park, on the little Calumet River, right? which is obviously a deep pitcher's park. But the question is, he doesn't play all his games in that park. He plays a bunch of games in these 7 parks and then a few fewer games in these 8 parks, right? So what is his effective number, right? And if you play in Chicago, you are effective. If you play every game, every inning, you will average out to playing in a .98 batting average park. Whereas if you are in Yellow Springs, it's a point. Whoops, I just erased that out. Let me undo that. That's no good. You'll see Yellow Springs plays in a .9 from an average standpoint. I then went through and calculated this this fake stat, a junk stat, where I just weighted different things different ways. And yes, overall Chicago is a .98 park by the way that I look at things. A little more offensive than Valencia's .96, although technically Chicago's park is more offensive than any park if you use the proper definition of what offensive means. You get that idea. I should also note that I've spent about a day and a half. I'm going to have a fun media guide article on true park factors. That's going to be kind of nifty to look at. So I'll do that. Let's see. Here's the farm system 25. Here's what I use to do those annual farm system things. Let's see. How did I do that? 2043. And I should probably cut a part of this out because I actually took the international complexes. Yeah, I took all the international complexes and I put them into this next folder or next sheet, so you can actually separate out and look at international complexes in the same way. And all I do is go through and count up the number of prospects that are 80s and 75s and put them in here. Then I have to do some weird things to in order to make it easy to get the ranks. I sort things and resort and whatnot. Ugh, who cares? There's the Umeba farm systems that I did. Obviously, we'll have to adjust those for the new structure. I keep my Hall of Fame ballot. Thanks to Randy for taking over a whole bunch of the Hall of Fame management. Now I can just basically, I used to keep track of how many years everyone was on the ballot and what their percentage was. But now all I need to do is keep track of whether I vote yes or no, which is great. So this year, you can see who who I have voted for consistently, and essentially every year I go through the Hall of Fame. I rethink. Is that a yes? Is that a no? Etc. And we go from there. But at least this keeps me in mind of what I have voted in the past. This is a big old hunkin' spreadsheet that's really just a notepad. And I use that to do those features that I put out ever since Ted stopped doing them, where I'm trying to get a flavor for how good or bad the decision process is. It makes for some good TNs, and it's what I used for the data set on the media guide article that I did on them last year. So, for example, Aki Kondo, right? Had on his horizon a situation where he had to opt out for a $28 million team option and a $28 million player option. Both of those would probably have been kept. If the team option had not been kept, he would have gained $6 million. He chose to opt out, which was probably wise at 29 years old. So that decision was probably good. But when we look at it in real situation, what really happened? Was it actually good? Right? At the end of the day, Omaha gave him that massive deal, which I think is actually 33 every year. I think I'll go back and I'll triple check that before I finish it. Regardless, he turned a possible $56 million into a essentially guaranteed $126 million over 4 years. That's a pretty big deal. So obviously it worked out for him, and that's how you read this spreadsheet. BBA team data, yeah, this is 2 years or 3 years out of date. This is all the things that I would like out of the park to give us in a nice, simple little screen. Stats Plus will do this. Will now do this team and market loyalty thing. So that's really helpful. We still don't have anything where you can get a nice track of owners and managers, which personally is not really useful to managing the team, but is great for team newses and to see things. Let me get this cash budget. This was just something that I posted way back a long time ago about how I think about budgets versus cash, right? When you have a bunch of cash, when you don't have cash, and how it affects what you can do with the budget. Oh, I'll leave this in here. Nobody probably really cares, but this is what I track our participation point um, history on, right? And so it's got all the charts automatically coded, and all I do at this stage is put in information on this 2044 line. That's how I will update this. Every time I finish a pass on the tracker, the Google Sheet tracker, I just take I've got some things that sum up all of the actual points, posts, and team newses, and I will plug them into these yellow boxes, and then it will calculate all the new things. For a long time, I was tracking this stuff on the right because of me, right? I tend to over participate. And so using the league average felt incorrect. So I would take me out of the league average and post that instead. Now we have guys that are participating way more than me, so I don't really do that nearly as much, but it's interesting and fun. New ballpark costs. This is just a spreadsheet that I use to calculate what it would cost to do Utopia Field in a couple of different ways. Pitch scale. Yeah, I'll leave this in. You guys may overthink this one, but this is something I was using to try to understand pitching ratings as best as I can. I've come to the conclusion that things are, especially when it comes to pitches, things are so kind of there's too many degrees of freedom to make any consistent statements that one thing is better than the other thing, because yes, one thing is better than the other thing, assuming lots of things stay consistent, but mostly things don't stay consistent. So an example, I'll give you an example. Let's look at fastballs, right? If you go into the editor and you give your player a 150 fastball, let's use fastball sinkers. I haven't filled out the full chart, so I'll use fastballs. But you give them a 150 fastball, right? If you give them a 150 fastball, whatever in the heck that means, does that mean movement, command? I got no idea. I got nothing, right? But you give him a 150 fastball, and his velocity is 96 to 98, then he will score an 8 on the overall number for his fastball. His fastball will be an 8, right? But if you give him that 150 fastball and his velocity is only 75 to 80, that same 150 fastball thrown at 75 to 80 is only a 4, right? So, Ted and I were having some conversation on the board about velocity versus movement. Here's velocity versus pitch score. If a pitcher's velocity bounces from 4, if a pitcher's velocity bounces from whatever 75 to 80 is it like 2 or 3 on the 1 to 20 scale? I don't know. If it bounces up 6 or 8 or 10 to a 98 mile an hour fastball, you will see his overall fastball will move up from 4 to 5 to 6, and in this case to 7 and then 8. So you tell me how to best use that. It's interesting and it's good to know. Intellectually, it's good to know. But how to best use that in assessing where pitchers are just from a 8. If you tell me a pitcher's got an 8 or a 9 or a 10 fastball, um, number one, it doesn't mean anything to me until I know you connect it up with velocity. Um, Pardon me. But there you go. And then the second piece, I don't know how it incorporates relative ratings into it. So all you can do is kind of get some general ideas of what ballparks might be. But at the end of the day, an 8 is an 8. I don't know. Oh, alrighty. Well, I am now officially blathering too much, so I will go back to my infamous, notorious uh, YS9 tracking spreadsheet and say that I'm done with this. It's a 50-minute video of absolute dryness if you don't care whatsoever about what's going on, about what I do, and that's should probably be most of you. So if you have gotten this far, I guess thanks. Good luck. Sorry, and I will post this, and you can do what you want with it. Have a great day.